Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you won't see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you're listening to Jams and Tea.
Alright everybody, welcome to a brand new Record Club episode of the Jams and Tea podcast. We just released our main episode this week, which was about Aesop Rock's Spirit World Field Guide and the second release from Autechre, their album Plus. And now we are going to be talking about Saoirse's recommended record for this week, which is Dose Your Dreams by Fucked Up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this band and album?
So I chose Dose Your Dreams for a variety of reasons. Partly because for a long time, I was obsessed with Joy Stops Time, which is the closer, and None of Your Business Man, which is the opener, and I never really listened through the record in full. Despite the fact it was 80 minutes, and because of the feeling of both of those tracks, knowing how they placed on the album, I was fascinated with what the experience of listening to it in full might be. But I give myself so many music listening chores just to expand my palette. I never really got around to it. I wanted to force myself to listen to it, and this is as good as opportunity as ever. This is an 80-minute opus. It shares characters with previous Fucked Up albums. It is a concept record, but it is still a visceral 80-minute experience. I love Green Day's American Idiot. In terms of punk rock concept records, this does that to shame. And I want to hear what everyone else has to say about it before I review it.
Okay.
It's great!
It's great.
And it's funny just because it's like we've had to cover, like everything we've covered this week is, just north of 60 minutes, which we normally are like, we're kind of curmudgeon-y old fucks. We don't like it when things waste our time. So generally speaking, in other circumstances, this crop of records any other week would just be like, But the thing is about all of these, and even for all of my misgivings with Plus, that was not a terribly draining listen. And with this album, I'd have to say it's the longest one and somehow goes by the fastest. And that probably has to do with the fact that it is blisteringly fast-paced, awesome, aggressive, punk rocky, post-hardcore-ish, just unruly music that's so much fucking fun, and it's so not content with being just that. I feel like when I started listening to this, I was like, okay, all right, this is I've never heard of this band or this record before. I have no idea what to expect, but the first couple tracks, I'm like, okay, this is good. I like this, but I don't know if they can sustain this energy for 82 minutes. And they do that by fucking weird-ass diversions, by making a fucking shoegaze song, by just going out and just throwing everything in the kitchen sink, which I think all of us to lesser or greater degree kind of fucking dig when applied correctly, and I think it is here. It's a double album rock opera that it's it follows a story. And at least from what I have been able to discern, it's almost like it is very in keeping with the fact that it's like you, Saoirse, because it made me think of Fight Club content-wise, in the sense that it's about a disenfranchised guy who works in an office and he hates his fucking job and he hates his stupid life.
It's about being a millennial office worker who's disenfranchised. Just the other movie it reminded me of is Brazil, just on a structural level.
It sort of has that scope of Brazil too, that just really wide and the album cover evokes it.
You fall in love with a woman who introduces you to new ways of thinking about capitalism.
Yeah, he meets a fucking homeless witch. A homeless witch in a dumpster, and she fucking gives him the fucking They Live glasses, and he goes on a fucking
tears open his third eye.
Yeah, and he fucking goes on this journey.
What he needed was a Spirit World guide, really.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the thing here. It's like, and after that, I will say, like, conceptually, it just sort of kind of, like, things just kind of fucking happen after this point. Like, it's really unruly, and I like that, because I feel like if it tightly constrained itself to a narrative, it would be less chaotic, and it would be more restrained, and I think that would go against its sort of intended purpose. And it's just about fucking all of these things about, like, just, embracing yourself and life and your dreams, and a lot of the same ways the Aesop Rock album did, and just sort of encouraging you to forge your own path and all that. And I like that. It is a band that is clearly, I said this when I talked about, or, well, not when I talked about it here, but in general, I said this about The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die, is that it's just like, it's a bunch of musicians that just so very clearly fucking love what they do so much and want to do so much of it. They just do this maximalist fucking thing, and it's awesome. They sort of bob and weave into these longer definitive statements, like the closer, Joy Stops Time, probably, I'd say, my favorite song on the record. It's just such a fucking triumphant finish to this very storied, very long, winding thing. It reminded me a lot of another Record Club episode, Gang of Youths Go Farther in Lightness, in that it is a weirdly cohesive assembly of different genres that you can't really pin down, but is also just trying to tell this very passionate, feels heavy story, and succeeds in doing so. I'd say that maybe where Go Farther in Lightness succeeds, where Dose Your Dreams maybe doesn't hit as many consistent bullseyes, is that the genre experimentations are almost too far out of like the core of the sound, which, and again, part of the appeal is that it's a little crazy, a little fucked up. But there are times where you're just kind of like, whoa, okay, that's weird. The moments that just sort of disrupt the flow that you don't get on Go Farther in Lightness, that I
mechanical bull type beat.
Yeah, mechanical bull.
Mechanical
featuring.
Bull, I get what you're saying. But Mechanical Bull is one of my favorite songs.
Cool,
on this
and
album.
you'll be able to talk about that when it's your turn. I have shit to say about
but
that song
no,
too.
Tyler, I'm sure will put this better. Featuring Ryan Tong. It's just. It does have its moments, but it never overshadows the record's true greatness or thesis statement. And I just had a lot of fun with it. It's a very fun record. It's a very chaotic record. It's a very restless album. And I think that it is very much to the core of who you are as a person, Saoirse. It's got, like, it's just all these fucking things stuffed into this. And it's just like, all of these things are so very quintessentially you. And it makes perfect and total sense as to why you chose it for that reason. And I completely understand your affection for it. And in many respects, I share that affection, because I think it is a great record that I want to spend a lot more time with, honestly. Like, if I had any regrets this week, it was the fact that I didn't listen to Dose Your Dreams as much as Plus or fucking Spirit World Guide, just because it was the longer one. But it's a record where I'm just like, wow, now I want to listen to this band's entire fucking catalog now. So, I mean, thank you for that.
Okay. This is going to be fun.
So, what you're saying is that it's not.
Yeah. Didn't much care for this. Won't front. The most consistent complaint is sort of a nebulous and annoying one. It's just that I did not vibe with it at really any given moment. It's far too scattershot for me. I completely understand why that's the appeal of the album. because I mean I think that's the goal of the album, is to be this sort of all-encompassing, wild, out there opus. But I just, like, every time they went in a certain direction, I was like, I've heard other bands do this, and I would like to be listening to that instead. The whole thing, I don't like the way the album sounds. I don't know, it feels kind of muddy and disjointed, and it doesn't feel like it has very much impact to me. Although on the other hand, I completely understand how that might be just me. It felt like it was hanging on too close to its influences, like Fight Club and Brazil / 1984. This sort of office drone discovers what the meaning of life is, like, so ingrained into like the punk ethos, not necessarily in like a particular story, but just like as an idea, as like a sort of spiritual meaning, that I felt like it sort of it came off as predictable to me in a way that I did not particularly care for. But I could also see where if I got on board with the music, that would be less of a problem, and I would have more of an ability to reach out and connect to all of those things within the concept.
Okay. Well, I can offer an interesting counterpoint to that opinion, because I do love this album, and I feel that so far anyway, the actual breadth of the concept and what's actually going on has been undersold, and understandably so, because it's a dense record that is very long. It's musically like overwhelming. Like it takes some time to process everything they're doing musically before you can even unpack what the songs are about. Not to mention the fact that, as is the most common bugbear that I hear with regard to this band, the lyrics are, although this is actually the record in which it's the least a problem with this band, but often the lyricism is like almost impossible to understand without reading along, because of primary vocalist Damien Abraham's shouting delivery style, and that is a much more prominent feature of all of the other fucked up records, whereas here, this is the one record where he actually spends a lot of the time stepping aside so that other people can sing. So this is certainly probably the best choice in terms of getting into this band, if this is a style that perhaps you're not super familiar with or into. But yeah, I can say categorically that if this record doesn't work for you, their other records will not either. But I want to really get into this, because I've been a fan of this band. Not like a huge fan. I wouldn't call them a favorite band. I wouldn't even call them a band I love per se. They're a band I love the idea of more than I often love the experience of listening to. But I do enjoy the experience of listening to them. They're a hardcore band that came up in the 2000s. Canadian band, worth mentioning, and they immediately established a sound that was like rooted in kind of hardcore punk and this aggressive, like loud guitars, like the typical fucked up sound. There isn't actually really a lot of on this album. Some of the earlier tracks like Talking Pictures and the title track, Talking Pictures especially, is probably the most like fucked up sounding, fucked up song on this album. But like they can't, their early stuff is kind of like this primarily like heavy guitars, shouted vocals, these songs that tell stories about characters that are very kind of loose allegories, but also a sense of ambition, a sense of like, this is a hardcore punk band, but they make songs that are like 6, 7, 8 minutes long. So again, definitely not for everyone. And sort of the kind of thing you could tire of quite easily. But I think they kind of perfected that on their their first record is great. Their second record, called The Chemistry of Common Life, which won the Polaris Music Prize in 2008, is the record where I think they really nailed that. that idea of their sound, because it's a reasonably well-paced, tight, hour-long record. But they were restless. They always had a desire to expand their sound, but also kind of expand their ethos as a band, and kind of expand the notion of what like a hardcore punk band can do. And so what that led to is their third record, 2011's David Comes to Life, which is an 80-minute rock opera like this. The difference being that is 80 minutes of that hardcore punk style and nothing else. And it tells this really fascinating story about this character, David, who is disillusioned, who falls in love with a woman who eventually dies, and then he's on trial for her murder. But also, the whole story is being told by this narrator who we come to realize is unreliable. And then through this meta development, the actual character of David starts questioning the narrator and kind of rebelling against this forced telling of his story by someone else. And it becomes this kind of interesting commentary on the notion of like storytelling and stuff. It's really fascinating, dense album. But the problem with David Comes to Life is it's 80 minutes of the same hardcore punk sound, you know, from track after track after track. It's lyrically dense and super fascinating, but it's the same sound over and over and over and over and over. And so Dose Your Dreams, I think, is an attempt to kind of address that, to perfect the idea of this band in terms of what they do, in terms of how they sound, in terms of their ambition, and make sure that the ambition and the storytelling and the thematic stuff is also reflected in what's going on musically. And for that reason, I think it's their second best record after Chemistry. And also worth noting is that a lot of the earlier records were written primarily and conceived primarily by songwriter and by singer Damien Abraham, who's a really fascinating figure that I don't have time to get into, but he's like been politically involved. He's run podcasts. He's like super wrestling fan who is like, he's a really interesting guy who's had a very colorful life. But anyway, Dose Your Dreams represents him sort of stepping aside and allowing the songwriting, the concept, and basically everything about this record to be conceived and developed by lead guitarist Mike Halichuk and also drummer Jonah Falco. This record is the product of them taking the storytelling and conceptual reins and pushing the band in a new direction that frankly was sorely needed. So Damien Abraham tended to have a greater interest in pushing the band in the direction of the traditional hardcore sound and punk music. But yeah, here the other bandmates express a desire to make Fucked Up something bigger than that. And it is also telling the story that is a continuation or / a sequel to David Comes to Life, where you have the same character still trapped in a malaise, but being shown a way out of that malaise by a female character, Joyce, who helps him to kind of go on a journey of self-discovery. But also the record becomes more than that as it progresses. It becomes about the idea of self-discovery, the idea of like finding a place in a society, the idea of like reconciling fitting in and reconciling wanting to be a part of something with also a strive to express your own individuality and express who you are. And it also gets into lots of socio-political themes. In the second half of the record in particular, there is a lot of commentary on capitalism and on it's not like necessarily about like attacking political structures as it is about simply trying to paint an honest portrait of like what life is like existing in a particular Western world and how it induces feelings of malaise and feelings of being backed into a corner in life and being unable to express yourself. And Dose Your Dreams is like this refrain that refers to this notion of like allowing yourself to express whatever you're feeling in an unfiltered way, to realize deep down who you feel that you are. And obviously there are parallels you can apply to that as well. You can go all over the map with that, but that's basically the central ethos of the record. And I thought of Jake's already kind of mentioned Go Farther in Lightness, and I've thought of that at certain points as well, but much more in terms of thematic links than sound. although structurally as well, this is a record that kind of attempts to do a similar thing, and I wouldn't be surprised if that record was in the studio while this was being recorded, because this record came out a year after that one. But anyway, you kick into things with None of Your Business Man, which establishes the narrative. It's a continuation of David's life. He's trapped in this kind of repetitive cycle, this dull workplace environment. But there's also like the touches of the surreal, touches of the strange that kind of jolt him awake, and it is a very kind of Fight Clubby thing, and I definitely think that comparison is apt, and also I definitely understand the feeling that, like, you know, this is well tread water, what's actually going to be happening here, but I think the record is sufficiently surreal and original in where it goes with that notion that it stands out from other works that are thematically similar. Raise Your Voice, Joyce is this kind of anthemic, like jolting into the action of the narrative, the meeting of these two characters, and it's just this beautifully anthemic and bright and sparkling rock song with an absolutely infectious chorus. Tell Me What You See is the narrator continues to be awakened to the world around him slowly by this mysterious woman, and it's this fuzzy and beautiful and enormous sounding track. But then it's notable that at this point, the narrative of the record starts to become a little bit more elliptical, a little bit more metaphorical, eschewing the narration of the previous records, eschewing a lot of the consistent perspective taking, and being a little bit more, I guess, less kind of like telling a story and more like variations on a theme that are nevertheless linked by characters. And Normal People is also notable for being the first major diversion on the record from a hardcore based sound into something that approaches an anthemic alt rock, which I really dig, and it has also this really kind of strange dance outro as well that hints at some of the directions the record will go on shortly afterwards. Torch to Light mixes vaguely psychedelic but heavy guitar passages with more atmospheric piano interludes and verses in between, and this creates something soaring and beautiful. And the scene that we see is David viewing his life as a stage play at the hands of actors to whom he has been actually quite happy to concede control and to become their symbol throughout his lifetime. And you get that in lines like, "Take me off to paradise, I'll pay you any price, just sit me down with a crown for my sacrifice." Talking Pictures feels instantly to me like a definitive fucked up song. What it is it's a crucial point in the narrative. It is David's joyous realization upon viewing this performance of his life that he needs to actually take his own life back, that he can be the one who writes the script. And it feels like an obvious point of comparison, and I would not be surprised if Saoirse was already planning to make it, but this is very Kaufman-esque, specifically like Synecdoche, New York. It evokes that thematic, a lot of the ideas there, and specifically some of the ways in which that's represented through these surreal, dreamlike experiences. I'm thinking of Ending Things is also probably an apt comparison to a certain extent as well, especially because that film also has a stage play scene in it that's, quite similar. But yeah, the Talking Pictures, the song is larger than life. It recalls the Japanese noise rock band Boredoms in the way the guitars sound and the way they construct a kind of wall of sound. But it also has links to the wider history of kind of like psychedelic music in Britain in the 90s and the 80s. String arranger Owen Pallett described hearing this album and exclaiming, "Oh, they've made their Screamadelica," referring to Primal Scream's 1991 album, which fused psychedelic music
it's
with...
a great comparison, yeah.
Used psychedelic music with like blues and heartland rock and other kind, and also a bit of noise music as well. That's a fantastic record if you haven't heard it. But very similar musical approach, except this record is much more expansive and digressive. House of Keys is a more traditionally fucked up rager, but it's also dotted with synths and other strange textures that I think that grounds it in the realm of this record particularly. The title track, Dose Your Dreams, is a string-laden centerpiece that I think strongly recalls the Stone Roses quite overtly, but also adds a lot of extra elements to the template of a song like Fool's Gold, which I think of every time I listen to this song. It serves as a thrilling rallying cry for the record and for David's self-discovery. It's also the point at which the album and the album's theme and the album's storytelling starts reaching outward a bit beyond merely David's story to represent the story of the community around him. And this is explored more deeply on the second half of the record. It becomes more communal. It becomes more about the environment, less about just the individual and more about the environment and the poisons of the environment. And also particularly the second half of the record digs into the notion of struggle in terms of like struggling towards self-fulfillment. It's not like David has this joyous realization that he can take control of his life and suddenly his happiness will be achieved. It's reckoning with the fact that once you have a realization about the fact that your life is in a rut, how do you then actually proceed? Like, how do you rebel against that? How do you take control of your life? The record spends a few songs thinking about and sort of questioning that idea. There's a song that immediately acknowledges the sense of overwhelmingness of that realization. Maybe that you want to give up. Maybe that it's not worth it. You get that in the anthemic rock of the Malays anthem, "I Don't Want to Live in This World Anymore," which features the superlative sax work of Jane Fair and these haunting choral vocals in the outro that again allude to a more communal second half of this record. It then bleeds into one of a number of the most dramatic stylistic shifts of the record, "How to Die Happy," which is basically a Jesus and Mary chain track by way of Cocteau Twins and spiritualized. It's very beautiful, it's very soft, it's very rich and enormous in scope in terms of the way it's produced. And it's just one of my favorite songs on here, to be perfectly frank. It's stunning how well such a pivot works for this band, and it works precisely because Damien doesn't sing on this song, because it would not work if he did sing on this kind of beautiful plaintive track. By the time we get to "The One I Want Will Come From Me," it's almost as though we're listening to an entirely different band than the Raging Punks who made their earlier records and the start of this album. This is another track deeply embedded to 80s British rock and pop music, and it's deeply fun and beautiful. Mechanical Bull is the most extreme piece of genre experimentation on the album, and I think it's probably the only significant misfire of the record, in my opinion. That said, it's not without purpose. I don't think it's like some cool thing they did that they wanted to chuck on the record. I think what it is, it's an attempt to viscerally capture the smoky, violent, industrial clatter of the capitalist society, the world that these characters are working and living in, and they're seeking to escape. The problem, though, is that the track does come across musically comes across a little disarming in a way that I think disrupts the flow of the record and doesn't serve the thematic journey as well as it could, even if the purpose is noble. In particular, I think that Damien's shouts on this song just do not work at all with anything else that's going on it. He sounds really out of place, and I think that even just removing him alone would improve the track measurably. But I do appreciate this idea of, like, we've dug into kind of psychedelic music of the 90s. Let's try and do this kind of Nine Inch Nails-y thing. Like, I appreciate the intent a lot. It's just that I don't care for this track at all. But it's the only moment of the record I really feel that. And then you go into Accelerate, which is a fantastic just piece of music. Like, it's a beautiful escape from the claustrophobic clatter and clutter of Mechanical Bull, both musically and thematically. And what this track represents in the narrative of the album is a glorious realization of a defiant freedom, the achievement of the goal of the struggle, the beginning of an utterly triumphant final stretch to this record. I think Accelerate in particular has this kind of angry rebellion to it. It's the sound of fists clenched in the air and a group of people marching as one. Then you have singer Jennifer Castle and Dinosaur Jr. frontman and legendary guitarist Jay Mascis lends vocals to the freeing and ecstatic Come Back Down. And then the album climaxes in glorious fashion with one of the most thrilling songs of Fucked Up's entire career, the buzzing and bright joy stops time. In spirit, it evokes something like one of the epics on Go Farther in Lightness that I referred to, but the dual vocals of Damien and guest singer Maya Folick give it a resonant glow that I think brings the record's themes and journeys together in a triumphant sort of denouement. Great ending to the record. Ultimately, with tracks like I've mentioned Mechanical Bull, and also with some tracks that like Living in a Simulation, Two Eyes Closed, and Love is an Island in the Sea, which I didn't really bother to mention. The record and the back half of it in particular, I think, does have some bloat that I think hinders it overall from being a straight up masterpiece in my eyes. But it's certainly no less than a great record to me. I think it's very close to being a masterpiece. And I think that it is encouraging and invigorating in terms of the narrative of Fucked Up as a band and their possibilities. I definitely am sympathetic to some of the things that Morgan has said about the kind of oppressive, and I don't feel that it's muddy, but I definitely understand the feeling as though some of the guitar layering and mixing is muddy on some of these tracks. I definitely am sympathetic to that. I would like to see them work with a producer that really brings out some of the ringing resonance to what they're trying to do and gives them a more anthemic, quality. I think working with a producer who is in tune to that and the possibilities of that would allow them to really realize something cool. But at the same time, this is a slept on record. It was one of the most interesting records of 2018. It definitely deserves a shout out here. I'm glad that doing this gave me an excuse to go back to it and spend more time with it. And I have to say the narrative and story and themes are much more in depth and interesting than I initially perceived them to be. And yeah, it's a very, very great album.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I almost feel like my tone is slightly inadequate because even though I recommended this record, all three of you have done such a good job of talking about it that, I've just done my part in asking you guys to talk about the record.
Mm-hmm.
And what else do I have to add by talking about it myself, But I will try anyway. So when I recommended this record, I had heard two songs, the opener and the closer, and that was it. And there was a beauty in going to this record and discovering as many secrets as I could from it. Discovering the story of it brought up whole new ways of appreciating it that I didn't realize, whereas the back half of it might have felt maybe slightly disjointed in a way the first half doesn't. Knowing about the story going into it enabled me to look at all of these songs not just in a way in which it carries the tonal aspect of the story, but it all reflects a genuine tonal journey you're meant to go on that is reflected in beautiful lyrics. Reading along to it with the lyric booklet next to me allowed me to reflect on the prosaic nature of the line to get lost in visceral punk screaming, like the verse in the opener. We all have a choice in this life you see, so tell me, boy, what's it going to be? Sit down and work and fill your heart with warm dreams of prosperity, or waste it all to float into that endless mize frivolity with urchins, fools, and vagabonds aboard the train to Babylon to fritter time and misbehave and flush your life right down the drain, ? And the whole record is like this, with these poetic and prosaic verses that just feel like
It doesn't feel like someone took a literature degree per se, but it feels like someone took a literature degree and understood the point of taking it. And even so, the way in which it has the story of being disassociated with labor, cross-sected with love, which is why I brought up Brazil, because the story mirrors it in many ways. But just the way in which it tells that story and the humanity of it captures so much about being human by dint of telling the story well and reflecting humans in the story. And this is all done with extraordinarily visceral and fun punk music that seems to marry both At the Drive-In and Blondie on one album. You get a second track like Raise Your Voice, Joyce, which marries hardcore punk excesses with the backup screaming in part, like just lyrical moans in the screaming register in the background, and then when the chorus comes in, raise your voice, Joyce, and this the background clean vocals from the female background singer, lead and lead and lead and lead and lead. Just give it this level of mad accessibility that you don't get from a lot of hardcore punk. And just I love this album so much. And the diversity on it is strong in the second half, but it's there on the first half. Like on the first song with the song like Normal People, the first half almost sounds like Leonard Cohen over a punk instrumental. And it tells the story of two very lost people stuck in a capitalist system who find each other. And I'm going to assume this is the person who is later depicted as angelic in much more metaphorical songs. Just how do I describe this without just going on forever about how much I love it? I was shocked, even though I chose this record, with how much I enjoyed it. And it's because every single song is an interesting punk song over 80 plus minutes, and does something interesting and different with the realm that punk music encompasses, from hardcore punk to post-punk and everything in between. And this, in part, I suppose, is why I love a song like Mechanical Bull. It is darker and brooding. It reminded me of Twilight Sad's No One Can Ever Know. There's this very pumping, very low synths. And the lyrics consist of this allegory about a worker trying to rebel against the capitalist trap he's trapped in. And he is rocking back and forth, trying to escape like a mechanical bull that is stuck in place whilst being driven by labor to rage in a trap. And I think the lyrics in the song capture this beautifully. A song like I Don't Live in This World Anymore that so beautifully captures the existential dread of living in a capitalist system, but also of the need to keep going forward, and also ends with a child choir. This album, it feels like, and this is going to sound presumptuous and pretentious, and I don't really care. This sounds almost like many of the punk records I love becoming unshackled in many ways from the conventions of their genre. It feels like this album gives musicians like me and so many others the permission to do so much more, because they have felt able to do whatever they want. And that, look, I understand that there are probably many other albums before this that do similar things, but this is the record that does that for me. Because I heard this at the time in which I needed to be given that permission. Like the title track is this, Tyler referenced it like a Stone Roses song with all of these other more art house influences being brought into it, and bringing all of these things into punk music is super exciting. And it just feels like after having listened to this album, it's like, why does anyone ask punk musicians to stick to very restrictive genres? Why did anyone listen to Transcendent Dysphoria Blues or White Crosses or Searching for Former Clarity or Searching for the Eternal Cowboy, Against Me as the Eternal Cowboy, or whatever it is, and think that there is something unpunk about the very minor progressions on the genre those albums make when this record exists? Why does anyone look at any punk band pushing their horizons and think you can't do that? Because punk is all about rejecting binaries and rules and constrictions. Like the whole thing that punk emerged out of was looking at a landscape in music that was stale and reducing it to its most raw, potent possibilities. Like the genres I listen to most are folk punk and emo, and both of those genres would not exist if people didn't feel the freedom to make music like this in general. I love this album to pieces, and I'm so glad I forced myself to listen to it in full multiple times with a lyric booklet.
Mm.
And I wouldn't have done that if this podcast and this segment didn't exist. In that respect, it is totally appropriate that we are talking about it on our 6-month anniversary. Because when I started doing this podcast, I felt like I knew a lot about music, but I didn't really at all. And this podcast has pushed me in beautiful ways to learn more. And what I'm doing now is bringing an album that already meant a lot to me to all of you with a fresh understanding of music that I have now. And we're all, and whether you like it or not, we are all engaging in an experience of understanding music I was totally alien to 6 months ago, and I feel totally inured to now. So I love this album, and I feel like it's perfect to talk about now. And whether you like it or not, I just feel immaculately happy that you're all here to talk about it with me.
Yeah, no, you've done a very good job, I think, of like highlighting what the ethos of this kind of music and why it's important. Why
this album specifically is just sort of the right hook of a punch that it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also like, you're right, there's a poignancy to like reflecting on our understandings of like music 6 months after we've started doing this podcast. And I imagine that when it comes around to being a year, we'll have like even more like musical reference points and understanding when we talk about something where that has the kind of like density of a record like this. So yeah, it's a good, a good little, it has a, relevance, resonance.
Joie de vivre.
That it has a French word. Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap up. Favorite tracks and ratings.
Sure.
Saoirse, why don't you go first?
Sure. Okay, so my 3 favorite tracks on this record are None of Your Business Man, Raise Your Voice Joyce, and the closer Joy Stops Time. My least favorite is the penultimate track, Love is an Island in the Sea, just because I don't love the vocal delivery on that song, and that's about it. And I'm going to give this record. Oh, this is hard to choose. I'm going to give this record a 9 out of 10.
Very, very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice. Good one.
Morgan, you go next.
I only really have 2 favorite tracks. Those being "None of Your Business, Man" and "Accelerate." Least favorites, I'm sure will be a trend here, is "Mechanical Bull." It's just a bit. It's just a bit shit. And
You sounded like you were trying to do my accent there.
Just a bit shit.
Yeah.
well, I was like, I couldn't tell if I wanted to go Bowie or just say something in my own voice, because I was thinking about
Jermaine
that
Clement.
time when
Yeah.
a little bit, because I was thinking of that time where Coldplay showed David Bowie a song and he just went, "It's not a very good song, is it?"
It's just not very good.
Funny.
Is it? Not
Yeah.
funny.
If I were you,
Yeah.
I would. If I were you, I would delete this.
Never show this to anyone.
David Bowie told them to delete it.
Well, I was
You
being
must
Lord
never
Ulrich
watch
Sad
this.
in Some Kind of Monster. Oh, Grizzly Man reference.
Yeah, I was
Very
doing
good.
Grizzly Man. Yeah, well done.
Very good. Love to see
I would
it.
not like to see the baby.
Oh no.
Anyway,
4.5.
Okay.
rip the band-aid off just there. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, Jake.
My 3 favorite tracks are "None of Your Business, Man," "Joy Stops Time," and I'll say I do really like the title track, "Dose Your Dreams." Least favorite track, say it with me, fellas.
Is it
Mechanical Bull.
Mechanical
Oh,
Bull by
no.
Kings of Leon.
That's the one.
I held off
What-
making that joke for so fucking long.
What have you done?
Well,
That's
Yes.
the most me joke ever,
A
and I
band
decided it was
that
too
the-
cheap.
A band this podcast will never cover.
Never.
Never.
Yeah, let's make that
Never,
agreement
ever.
now.
Also,
Kings
the
of
album
Leon
gets
a
an
band.
album gets an 8 out of 10.
Chill.
sick. Okay,
So it's Tyler now.
Yes, it is. Sick. My favorite tracks on this album are let me think. Normal People, Talking Pictures, and How to Die Happy. Least favorite track, Mechanical Bull, and I'm going to give it an 8.5.
Nice. So that's
Yeah.
a 7.5 out of 10. We gave a 7.3 to XTC's English Settlement. And a
did.
7.4 to Full Circle Nightmare by Carl Craft.
Very good. Okay, so that's our review of Fucked Up Dose Your Dreams. I'd be very interested to see if they have a new album coming out anytime soon, because that will be a fun one to review.
Yeah, when did
Fingers
this even
crossed.
come out again?
This came out in the
2018.
latter half
Oh.
of 2018, so yeah.
So
we'll
that
see.
it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect them to make something in the next year.
I mean, you say that, but this album, I read an article where it said it took them exactly 2 years to record. They started writing it on one day, and they finished recording it 2 years to the day after that.
Interesting.
Um,
Well, we'll see, because they may not try to do an 80-minute concept record next time. But I mean,
probably not.
God love them if they do. Next week on Record Club, we're going to be discussing Ween's The Mollusk, another sort of concept album. It's not like a concept album in the same sense as this one is, but it has a unifying theme, which is SpongeBob,
Mm.
not literally.
Oh!
It predates SpongeBob, but it's like
Who lives in a
unifying-
pineapple under the sea? Oh, shit, man!
Yeah, the unifying theme of the mollusk.
Fluid and
is-
yellow and porous is he.
Oh, shit, man!
The
Sorry.
ocean. Yeah, and then we look forward to discussing that. Thank you for watching. If you didn't check out our main episode this week, we reviewed ASAP Rock and Orticker. Go and watch it now. And Rock Over London, Rock on Chicago,
Chicago.
KFC, finger licking good.
ASAP Rock?